Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 3 DFS and prop live stream out there for the Scottish Open. Got to break down what to expect from the course tomorrow, and of course how to approach all of your exposure to go out there and have yourself a day. First off, welcome on in wherever you guys are. Cheers. Yeah, we got a little Red Bull here, so just keeping it clean out here tonight. But excited to hop into the action for tomorrow. I'm going to be staying up all night to watch it. So main reason for that is I think there's going to be a really big prop edge out there, especially if you stay up and you react to some of that early play. So I'm going to be pulling an all-nighter, essentially doing that. So a little bit of Red Bull, no alcohol, or else I would not be staying up all night. And like I said, just going to enjoy ourselves out here this Friday evening. So first off, welcome on in. We got Bart down there, Rip Coyle. We got Kevin, Nick, who says, let's have a weekend. Cheers to that, my man. What's going on, Frank? He says, you are the GOAT. Kind words, but I appreciate you, my man. Karoom's got a little bit of a crown and coat going. Long time no see, Derek. Love to have you here. We got, I wish I would have waited to open this because, hey, it sounds like I'm opening a beer, but it's just a Red Bull. What's going on, Samuel? What's going on? Why I win? Let's start it off with our friends, our presenter of this live stream, which of course are our friends over there with the Ship It Nation. They are your source for all your needs with DFS, not just what we have here with PGA DFS. If you want their content for that, of course, that's one of the many sports that they cover. But the reason why they're the perfect fit as a partner here on the channel is because they cover a lot of the other sports that I'm not an expert on, right? A lot of you guys probably play fantasy sports for a lot of the sports that you're passionate about, right? And that might not just be golf. It might be somebody that grew up playing baseball, watches MMA, watches NFL like all of us do out there. The Ship It Nation has you covered regardless of sport. So over there, they give you guys all those projections, the same kind of content that you get here for golf from me for all those different sports. So they have catered player pools out there through all their content creators. And the best part about the Ship It Nation is they're built on winners. You have guys that are out there putting in all kinds of exposure themselves and actually taking down contests. Unlike a lot of the other competitors out there that have guys that aren't even entering lineups running their sites, over there at the Ship It Nation crew, it is all about the actual process and, having something to show for it. So that's what I respect about them. That's why I was super eager to go out there and partner with them is unlike, and I'm not going to name any names out there, some of the other sites where you have players that are huge losing players out there on their rosters. You don't get that with the Ship It Nation crew. So, of course, right, check them out. Use code Luke10 if you guys are signing up, and you'll get a nice little discount off any membership over there. Let's start it off with a look at the golf course today and how we can use that to our advantage for moving day. So first off, the scoring conditions did slightly favor the AM starters. That wasn't really something that I was expecting. And up until about the last hour and a half of play, it was only about a 0.1 shot difference. Towards the end, when the wind started to really kick up, some of your later starters made a mess of it out there. It's why the cut line was able to stay at -3. And for a while, it had been like a 50-50 coin flip on whether it was going to go to that -3 and -4. And when that wind ended up coming into the picture, that was all she wrote out there with the -4 cut line. So you saw that in terms of the scoring averages. And for our week-long lineups, where I said to kind of favor the PM-AM wave, 70% of my player pool, right, was PM-AM players. That led to a pretty sizable advantage because if we take a look at day one, right, the PM guys got about a 0.42 shot advantage. And then today it ended up being a 0.34 shot advantage. So about 3/4 of a stroke between the 2 days, which I know doesn't sound like all that much, but it had a drastic impact with my 6 of 6 percentage. I have well over 30% at this stage, so sitting quite pretty at this point. Of course, with guys like Aberg and First, that were one of my core plays. Sahith, Thomas Dietrich in the mix. It's been quite a solid start over here for your boys. So a lot of that was because of this weather edge, right? And the reason why I circle back to show you guys this is that there wasn't that much of a weather at all over the first few days. It was pretty calm, all things considered. But all it takes for a huge edge to appear is any sort of a weather change, right? Day one, it was slightly more wind in the morning, right? This afternoon, they got a little bit of wind towards the end of the round. That led to a 0.75 shot advantage. So now when we look at this forecast out here for Saturday, we really have to take it seriously, right? That's why I go out of my way to point that out. First off, to kind of show us where we are at this point of the week, but also tomorrow, it looks like we're getting that kind of effect. In the morning wave, they're going to have slightly higher sustained winds and wind gusts compared to what you're going to have in the afternoon. And while some of these weather models are calling for some rain out there in the PM hours, I think I'd rather play in a little bit of drizzle in lower winds than out there in some gustier and higher sustained winds conditions. So I think in general, Saturday, you're going to see scoring come back down a little bit, right? This golf course typically plays over par when we get nasty conditions. And while it's not going to be true Scottish weather where it's going to be like 25 to 30 mile an hour wind gusts, it's still going to be a lot more blustery than we've seen for the first few days. And once again, a 0.75 shot difference seemingly out of nowhere. If it is going to be a night and day difference between the wind gusts, maybe this PM wave does get about a half a stroke advantage. Something to kind of add on top of that is the talent gap difference out there with the PM starters. The guys that are teeing off later are your players towards the top end of the leaderboard. So by default, a lot of those guys are going to have better rounds. But when you add on top of that, they might have more receptive greens with this rain, also the lower winds to deal with. That's where I think you can have this advantage. And it's kind of unfortunate. I'd rather it be the AM guys that are getting the better side of things. But, the reason for that, of course, is ownership, right? AM guys are going to be slightly lower owned. But we've got to deal with what, the cards that were dealt, right? The reality is a lot of the chalk out there tomorrow is playing in optimal conditions. So the result of that in my player pool and my exposure is I'm going to be taking a little bit more chalk than usual. I'm going to be mixing in some of the later starters. And while I'll still need some mid to early guys to get some leverage outside of my 1-2 leverage spots in large field lotteries, I'm not going to have a lot of those players. In large field single entries, in smaller field GPPs, almost all of my exposure are going to be mid to later tee time. So the reason why I wanted to, again, set that perspective is that any kind of weather change is multiplied in Scotland, especially when you're on a link style golf course that is as exposed as it is over here at the Renaissance Club. Next week, even more so, right? When it's as exposed as a true link style golf course is, this one's a little bit more inland up on a cliff. So it is slightly more protected, but even then it still is wildly affected by the weather. Next week, we really have to be paying attention to this weather report. So that's what I'll say about it. I think it favors your later starters. And to give you guys some perspective on tee times, your last tee times are at about 3:40 local time. So the last, let's say, maybe 2.5 hours of tee times are the ones that are going to get that sizable advantage. And even if you're teeing off at like 11 or 12 local time, I still think you're going to get some sort of an advantage over the early starters because you're not playing your whole round out there in the wind, right? You may be playing your first hour and a half, 2 hours out there in slightly windier conditions, but for their last 2 to 3 hours, they're going to be playing in the same kind of wind as your leaders are for their entire round. So I don't think you only have to take those later starters. I think the mid-tier guys are arguably almost just as good as the later tier guys because they're going to have comparable conditions. And then on top of that, they're going to be lower owned, right? Because they're not the guys at the tip top of the board. They're not pure leverage, low owned options like the guys that just hardly made the cut, but they're also not mega chalky. So if you're going to have to get different, I think that's the range to do it, right? Not going to the super early starters that are playing in the wind the entire time. So that's reflected in my exposure. And outside of, I think, 3 players out there for tomorrow, I'm not taking anyone that's teeing off super early. And the 3 players that I chose in particular that are teeing off early are guys that I think can overcome it, that have shown it in the past that they're decent wind players. So that's the weather situation out there for round 2. So let me go ahead, share my screen. We'll bring up the Scottish Open projections and then talk through some of your player questions here in a minute, as well as some of the players that I want to point out as highlighted plays. The one thing that you'll see on this spreadsheet this time is that I'm going to have ownership for every single player in the field. So typically, right, I censor the ownership for a majority of the guys, but this time around, I still have my player pool censored, also my projected points censored over there for the Patreon page. But to give us some perspective onto why I'm choosing certain players, I did want to give you guys the bonus ownership on there. So if you guys enjoy the bonus ownership, go out there, smash the like button right now, and let's catch up on the live chat, guys. So where did we leave off? A bunch of comments down there. Do we just keep playing Aberg? You feel like he has a disappointing round coming in 3 or 4. Yeah, it might come in round 3 or 4. I'd say more likely round 4, right? He goes out there, he crushes it round 3. He's out there with a 2-3 shot lead. Then he's maybe more viable to have that happen. So hopefully it doesn't happen round 3 because I'm playing him out there. What's going on, Samuel? Your boy Ann missed the cut by 1. That is right. Absolutely stoked that he missed the cut. Happy that Seabez ended up packing it as well. A lot of chalk that I thought was egregious this week that did not make it to the weekend. So a lot that I was happy to see pack it up. And he would have been one of the main guys there. And you said you love Houston Man. Yeah, I love him too. So no offense to the guy, but that's just the pure DFS player in me, right? Not happy that the guy Minian missed the cut, but more so the play that was, I think, a little bit overowned this week. What's going on? Those are the worst. You're talking about Red Bulls. Yeah, they don't taste very good, but hey, they wake you up. What's going on, Antonio? Julio, 4-4 on the DK pick 6. Yeah, so I can't even play those, Julio. So good to know. I didn't know whether they ended up hitting or not, so that's good to know. Again, I wish I could because the lines over there are so soft compared to what they have on the other sites. So good stuff on that, man. I'm glad to hear that. No one let me know that, which is interesting, right? Someone on the Discord could have been like, hey, Luke, good job on the pick 6. But hey, I appreciate you, Julio. What's going on, Chris? Have you seen where the flags will be? I have, yeah. They look pretty similar to days 1 and 2. Thing is, with a link style golf course, it is so hard to tell whether something is an easy or a hard pin location if you don't have the slopes. Because even something that's tucked to the side could have a side slope like what you had on 13 today. If you guys didn't see hole 13, it's the one that is along the ocean on the back 9. And they had the slope to the right side of the green. It was a front right pin location. And you could miss the green to the right by like up to maybe 7-8 yards, like a pretty solid, like 20 feet out there to the right side. And the ball would come the whole way back to the pin and almost go in. Somebody took advantage of that, would have been Rory McIlroy. And I'm glad he did because I needed it out there for one of my props. So the thing is, Steven, it's hard to tell with the pins because anything could be like that. I mean, that pin looked tucked out there on 13, and in reality, it was actually a lot easier. And unlike the other courses, Steven, we can't go hole by hole and take a look at the slopes. On the DP World Tour app, you can get like the mini slopes, but it's not like the PGA Tour app where we can go on there and actually see like the contours of every green, which kind of stinks. Most disgusting chalk, McKibben missed cut. Yeah, that too, Nick. I'm trying to think of who else sent it packing that I was glad that did. I guess I'll mention the guys that I wasn't happy that missed the cut too, right? We got to mention both sides of it. Main one for me, Matt Wallace, that bastard, absolutely bitch quit on his back 9. In fact, what did he end up at? Even par by the end of things? Just distasteful. I mean, he was -3 with like 5-6 holes to go and then completely melted down. Who else missed the cut that made us happy though? Hideki, I was not on that one. I was rooting for Loyden. He got snubbed from his Olympic bid out there for the Netherlands. So just, felt bad for him. Kind of hope that he'd play well. Same thing with Thurston Lawrence. I'm always a slut for playing Thurston Lawrence. He's an absolute stud. And then Guido Migliozzi. Outside of that, my player pool was pretty spotless. Jordan Spieth too, but you guys know I was playing Jordan. Luckily, didn't play very much Jordan Spieth this week. Anyone else that really got me for my main slate? That is Alex Fitzpatrick, blue dick, out there for the showdown today. So hey, that's another guy that I'm not too happy with, to say the least. But yeah, it was a really good week for 6 of 6s, that's for sure. No one that else we can really pick on, though. Not a lot of chalk that missed the cut. Like Sepp missed the cut, but he wasn't that highly owned. Who else? Keith Mitchell did, but again, he wasn't very chalky, right? Same thing with Spieth. It wasn't like he had a lot of ownership. Yeah, the main ones, McKibben was the one that I was kind of sweating out there because, dude, 17% ownership was nuts. And I just realized you guys couldn't even see the tab I was looking at. My bad. I do miss Carnage as well, Antonio. You and me both. Do I trust Rory? No, he's losing strokes on approach. So, Frank, yeah, we'll talk about Rory here in a minute. I do not trust him. What's going on, Paul? Did I mention the 6 of 6 rate? Yeah, it was about 10 to 12%, depending on the contest that you're in. So, yeah, relatively high 6 of 6 rate. I'm sitting at about 31%. So, hey, high 6 of 6 rate, but we're cleaning it up on that. Yeah, my buddy Spieth, it's a sad thing, Nick. I mean, I was letting you know a little bit earlier, right? I was saying it's kind of sad what's happening to him. Even a Spieth apologist like myself that'll find any reason to play the guy, has not found a lot of reasons to play him lately. And in fact, outside of main slate this week, I don't have much exposure to good old Jordan Spieth. And even last week, right? Last week I had some exposure at the John Deere. Worked out. He actually played pretty well. I never thought he was actually going to win that event, right? Even when he was in the second to last group out there on Sunday, it was like, oh, here we go with Jordan. Zero chance he was going to win that one. Yeah, he was trashed last year too. Not all of last year. The second half of last year, yes. That is coincidentally when he hurt the wrist. So I think there's a lot of correlation there. And whether he wants to admit it or not, his iron play took a direct downturn after that and has not been the same. So that's what I think is causing it. What's going on, Samuel? Who are we taking as a top bounce back? We'll talk through a few, but honestly, I'm not playing many, Sam, because of the fact we want later tee times. I don't love a lot of bounce backs, that's for sure. Yeah, dude, the -8 cut, is it -8 now? I know it was -7 a little bit before. Mentioning the ISCO, Kevin Kisner is an absolute legend. I didn't have any sort of exposure on the ISCO, so this is completely non-DFS related. But the guy went out there, he made an eagle on his second to last hole to make the cut on the number. So yeah, it went from -7 to -8 over the last maybe half an hour of play, and -8 cut. Yeah, I'm glad I stayed away from that event. It's I can't stand events like that in the American Express where it's like, okay, let's go out there and just make all the 10 to 15 footers, and whoever makes the most wins the golf tournament. Like that's not how it should be, in my opinion. And I'm sure a lot of you agree with that, especially Antonio, who's missing the carnage, right? What's going on, Rami? You went 100% Homa and Clark, and you were too close. Yeah, Homa and Clark did not play very well. So yeah, that wasn't the best choice. What's going on, Chris? You meant at this course. Oh, yeah, he did. He top 10 the year before that, though. So I don't know. He kind of seems like he likes the course. I mean, obviously, the 1 year sample size, you can say that. But yeah, last 2 years, not so much, huh? Tom Kim Eagle helped him make the 6 of 6 for you. There you go. Good stuff, Paul. And he was only 0.62% ownership out there on Rosner. Yeah, Rosner, let's hope he keeps it up, right? I mean, obviously, great after 2 rounds. We've got to hold for 36 more holes. That's I don't know. He's one of those players that you're nervous about until he gets through hole 72. What's going on, Deacon? What's going on? Your main lineup is not doing too hot, but you did take second place in the single entry. Well, there you go, right? Hey, you came in here for the showdown advice, and you ended up going out there and making something. So I was glad to be able to help you there, and let's build on that for rounds 3 and 4. You got Bobby Mack turns into Prime Tiger. Yeah, dude. You love it. Dude, I have to say, remember how he was bitching about the drones when he was in contention, when he went out there, kind of was looking very irritated on the course. Now he was like out there high-fiving fans. He was interacting out there with his home crowd. I think a lot easier for him to do now that he's in Scotland. He's not dealing with annoying Americans, as I'm sure he would refer to a lot of us as over here, and our annoying drones, right, that are flying on the golf course. But yeah, dude, I think that he's got a good chance this weekend. I'm backing him, that's for sure. I've been doing it pretty much every round, and I'm going to continue for it. What's going on, Kevin? He said, thank you for the info, of course. How do I feel about the round scores being 67.5 and 66.5? I'll circle back to that when we talk about props. We're going to stick on DFS for now. So I'll try and remind myself to get back to you there. Just don't want to, go from topic to topic and drive the audience nuts, right? Going from one thing to one thing. Let's talk about DFS first. So I'm going to go through some of my highlighted plays. If there's anyone you want my specific take on, just let me know. But we're going to focus on 5 players here. So it's maybe not as many plays as normal, but because I'm giving you guys the ownership, I just wanted to cut it down just a little bit, right? I can't give you guys like all the free content out here, right? We gotta cut it down here a little bit, but you'll get a good idea for what I'm looking for in players. In terms of a spend up, my favorite, it's not my only spend up. There are at least one other guy. I think it's 2 other guys that I'm taking up here towards the top end of the board. But Colin Morikawa is probably my favorite spend up because of how well he's hitting his irons. He's gaining over 2 strokes per round with his shots gained approach. And the putter, which has been a lot better in 2024. He's been so much more consistent this year, and it's why his results have gotten back to being elite tier stuff. He's gaining over a stroke per round there as well. So while with some players, right, you'd be worried about them going out there and spiking with the putter, Morikawa has been doing this all year. And the one thing that we've kind of noticed with Colin is that round 4 can be his bugaboo. He does not have the best Sundays, especially when he's in contention, but he'll get himself into contention time and time again. I mean, the guy has been a machine this year. And in the past, the thing I have to say about it is that he might even be a solid live bet spot right now, because in the past, he was a closer. Colin Morikawa was the type of player that would go out there. I mean, you saw him in majors. You saw it well before that in PGA Tour wins, going out there and being a stone cold killer out there on Sundays. So I didn't bet him outright this week, but as I've watched play the first few days, obviously our Aberg bet out there at the top end of the board feels pretty solid. But I think my favorite player that I've seen just eye test wise is Colin Morikawa. He's got the kind of game that you need for this kind of golf course. As long as it doesn't get too windy, I think his real weakness is playing in hard conditions. I think you're going to see him at least in the top 5 by the end. So I'm playing him in Showdown, the kind of player that has elite tee time. So just like the maybe last 3-4 hours of tee times, the kind of guys that I'm trying to take in my lineups. Next up, we've got ourselves Thomas Dietrich at $8,400. And Dietrich is another guy that I played for round 2. Shot -1, so about a field average day. Not what we were hoping for out there in a Showdown lineup, but didn't kill us as well. But what I'm trying to get out there for my Saturday lineups is some upside on the course that he's killed. Right? He's got the top 10 finish a few years ago. He's also got the second place finish out there 4 years ago at this event. And the kind of player that over the first 2 days is gaining a bunch of strokes out there with his approach play, and also with the putter. So kind of Thomas Dietrich kind of stuff. When he's playing his best golf, he has really solid off the tee play, solid irons, and can gain a ton with the putter. That's where he's really going to move himself up the board. And to this point, he hasn't had that nuclear round. I mean, round 1, he did a pretty decent job at going out there and making putts, but a majority of his shots gained came out there with the iron play. So we've yet to really see that spike putting performance. And on a golf course where he's done that plenty in the past, that's the kind of player that I'll take at relatively high ownership. Now, the top end of the board, as you can see here, guys, right, everyone's getting some ownership. If you're trying to find like a pure pivot towards the top, Minwoo Lee is, I guess, as good as you're going to get, right? I've got him at about 11.2% ownership. All things considered, it's pretty spread out. Reason for that is it's after the cut line, right? After the cut line happens and we go from 156 players that you have to choose from down to just, I think it was 73 or 74 that ended up making the cuts. That has an impact on how ownership is distributed. Not so much with the salaries, but with the average ownership per player. So even your quote unquote low owned guys up top now are still going to be like 11% owned. And the issue we already outlined, if you weren't here for the weather section, is that the wind early on looks a little bit gnarlier than what we have in the afternoon. So while I would normally be like, okay, Minwoo's going off early, slightly lower owned, right? Maybe you mix him into lineups. It's not so much the case out there for this slate because of the fact that he's got the harder end of the spectrum and he's not playing as well. That 11.2% number just isn't low enough for me to get there. Right? If he was going to be 4% owned in large field lotteries, then maybe he'd be worth taking, right? Out there in the harder conditions. But out there in the large field lottery, I've got him projected for like 11.2% ownership. I think the place to use him as differentiation might be in like a single entry though, right? Like, and you're not going to need a bunch of differentiation. I guess that's the issue, right? Like in single entries, guys like Minwoo might be sub 5% owned. Guys like a Hovland, right, might be like 10, maybe 11% owned. Out there in some of those single entry contests, you're going to get different by taking that kind of player, but I don't know if you need it, right, to go out there and beat 200 people. You don't have to be as bogged down about the ownership towards the top end of the board. So I'll say that there is opportunity for low ownership, especially depending on the contest that you're entering. But like in the large field lotteries, I just don't think you're going to get that like 4 or 5% ownership number that you'd probably want on a guy like Minwoo to take him in the harder conditions. Where you can find that kind of ownership, and I guess where you would want to take some, spots, some spots are, I guess risk out there with players would be towards the middle to bottom end of the board, where you can get a little bit more leverage on that kind of player. Moving down a little bit further, Sanjay's garnering some ownership, but just kind of like this 9-10K range, ownership is pretty spread out. Even your low-owned players like a Davis Thompson, a Matt Fitzpatrick here at 9.9% are all at about 10% ownership. So once again, even if you want to take an early starter and get some quote-unquote leverage, I don't know how different you're going to get to the field. Right? Even if Davis Thompson is lower owned than I'm expecting, let's say like 7-8%, it's 7-8%, as opposed to a Brian Harman here at like 13.7%, who, by the way, Brian Harman is like number 2 in the field in shots gained approach. For me, I'd rather take a guy in the middle end of tee times, like a Brian Harmon, over a Davis Thompson that's going off early. So it's, I don't know, kind of unfortunate because, right, typically we would be taking some of these early starters. It's just that the weather doesn't really dictate it as the best option to get to. I've also got Sahith Theegala getting some ownership, but because he's a late starter, and I guess I'll just spill the beans on him, I'm playing him out there for round 3. His shots gained profile is extremely sustainable. He's gaining in all 4 stat categories, and he's not doing it with like anything too much. Like everything's right around the shots gained per round, which is the kind of thing that you can easily continue into the weekend. So yeah, there's some ownership up top I'm definitely taking in lineups. Part of that is the fact that I'll eat ownership towards the top end of the board, and regardless of the slate, but also because they're getting the better end of conditions. Moving down into the 7K range, Nikolai Højgaard is the kind of player that I'll take as a conviction play down here in the 7s. In general, most of my plays are much lower owned than what we have here with Nico, but the reason for taking him at 14.6% is I think it's a little bit of a misprice, probably at least $700, maybe $800 too cheap. But on top of that, one of the best iron players over the first 2 rounds. And just like you heard from me yesterday, the reason how we got to an Aubergs, a Matteo Manacero that shot -7 out there today, if you're going to make somebody a conviction play and take them at slightly higher ownership than maybe you should, it's on a guy that is striping it with the irons. Because if anything's going to continue from day to day, it is that approach play, right? It's the most consistent stat out there in the PGA Tour, and that's the reasoning for Højgaard. So if you liked yourself some Aberg out there for today, well, you might want to consider taking some Højgaard out there for Saturday. And then the last play that we're going to talk up here, and I'll still mention a few more throughout your questions, but Romain Langasque at $6,600. And as you can imagine, he's one of those guys I'm using for some leverage, as you can get him at about 4.5% ownership. And he's got a mid-end tee time, right? He's not going off super early. He's going to be playing probably at least 2, maybe 2.5 hours of his play, maybe even 3 hours out there in some windier conditions. But the second half of his round, right, maybe the whole entire last 9 holes are going to be played in next to no wind out there. So I don't think it's like a huge weather edge thing, but more so a guy that's been hitting the ball well over the first 2 rounds, gaining a bunch of strokes on approach, and a player that has played well at this golf course in the past, not just the last 2 years when it's been a co-sanctioned event, but also in the past when this was a DP World Tour event. So a guy in general that I play a lot when I play DP World Tour DFS, because he's a ball striker, right? You guys know I'm a slut for my ball striking, that I'll try and take as many of those guys as humanly possible in my lineups. And if I can get him at sub 5%, I'll do it, right? And down low, I guess just to point this out, no one's that chalky. I mean, even guys towards the top end of the board, like a Mackenzie Hughes, a Matthew Jordan, I've got it like 6.4%. So if you want to take a Matthew Jordan, for example, who I'll just tell you, I'm playing out there for my round 3 showdown lineups, you can, because he's not 10 to 15% owned like he would be for a Sunday showdown. I'll say this, Nicholas Højgaard Muller. This kid hits the ball further than anyone I've ever seen. He's an absolute stud, and he's hit the ball well. So you can probably guess what I'm doing with him. Again, I can't give you guys every single play I'm getting to, because I think my player pool was only like 20 guys. So we gotta keep something behind the paywall and for my Patreon members. All right, let's catch up on chat and then move on to the prop side here in a few minutes. Where are we at? We got somebody posting just a weird comment, so we'll get it out of there. What's going on, sites? Sungjae Im has been consistent even with the relatively meh putting. He's yeah, I mean, the putting's actually been good this week, so that's why I'm a little bit thrown off by your comment, sites. But the iron play has been pretty decent this week. Let me just get back to the right tab. I was looking at the ISCO here for a second. Let me bring the Genesis back up. So to this stage of the week, let's get to the right tab on here. Sungjae's gaining about 1.6 strokes with the putter. Everything else is into the positive, though. So I think the outlook for Sungjae is very positive going forward. And I can't give away whether I'm playing him or not, but the shots gained profile is definitely pretty solid. What's going on, Barry? Hey, Luke. Thank you for the great advice in round 2, of course. Glad to be able to help you out there. You took down the $10 tournament, so that's awesome. I'm not sure what first prize is, but I'm sure it's pretty sweet. So good stuff there. What's going on, Nuge? Can you explain how Captain Showdown works? Yes, I can. So it's a little bit different. So you pick a captain in Captain Showdown. You also only get to play with like the late starters. So they cut it off typically to the late guys out there for the late showdown. and you pick one guy. It's kind of like a showdown out there for NFL where you have to pay more for that player, 1.5 times more, but you also get 1.5 times the points. So the idea with Showdown is that your captain is by far the most important piece, the guy that is your most convicted play, because ideally you want them to have the most efficient score. If they're a low-end guy, like a super cheap player, like a 5-6K guy, well, then you probably want them to go out there and just have an efficient performance to be super cheap. And then the rest of your lineup is going to have a lot of salary to work with, right? And you can go out there and just play a bunch of like 10, 11K guys. If you're going to spend up and take one of those 10, 11K guys as your captain, well, then the rest of your lineup is going to have a lot of those cheap punts in it. So it's a completely different dynamic. Your captain changes your lineup construction, because if you punt with your captain, you can essentially play like the 9 and 10K guys for your entire lineup for the other 5 spots. The other side of that is you take like an Aberg or a Rory as your captain, you're going to have to take a lot of those 6K guys in lineup. So it's kind of crazy. What's going on? Thoughts on X? Dude couldn't make a putt in the front 9 and still shot -5. I think you're spot on there, man. He same thing round 1. He was playing decently. He had everything on track except for the driver. Lost about 1.8 shots with the driver in round 1. So yeah, I think he's decent. You're saying the top 10 is plus 150. I think he's going to top 10. Yeah, honestly, I think round 1 is as bad as we're going to see from X. And if anything, the harder conditions plays into his hand. The year when he won the Genesis Open, it was won at -7. So he's the kind of player that relishes when this course plays harder. And based on the conditions tomorrow, I think that's exactly what we're going to see, right? Let's see. You think Xander finally found his rhythm? He's had it all year. Heck, he won the PGA Championship. So, hey, he's had it, man. Not even recently. He's definitely onto something. When it rains, it plays completely differently. Yeah, maybe. You might be right, Jeff. It might play a little bit different when it's raining, but honestly, the wind is the bigger factor, right? I can just tell you, as somebody that's played links golf before, that has followed the sport for quite some time, it plays more differently when it's windy than when it's just a little bit of rain coming down. They're calling for about 1/10 of an inch of rain over the entire afternoon, which means that it's going to be a mist, right? We're not talking about it pissing down rain like it does down here in South Florida, for example, right? Like, yeah, playing in a rainstorm in South Florida is a lot different than playing in clear conditions. Playing in a mist, not so much, right? In the morning, it's still going to be humid. It's going to be very humid before that storm rolls through. So it's not like it's going to go from completely dry out there to super soft in the afternoon. It's going to go from, humid, cool out there in the morning to a mist out there in the afternoon. And it actually gets a little bit warmer. So I'm not worried about the rain. Like I said, it's not a true rain. They're calling for like 1/10 of an inch of rain out there tomorrow. In my opinion, it's not going to play that same kind of way. Like you got to have a lot more than that to make that the bigger impact, right? The bigger impact is it going from 3-4 miles an hour of sustained wind out there to 13 to 15 miles an hour, right? In nearly 20-mile-an-hour gusts. This golf course last year, for example, played almost an entire stroke harder just because of that, right? There was rain out there last year in a few spurts. The big difference, in my opinion, you could be wrong about it, right? I've been wrong on things before. In my opinion, it would be the wind, but who knows? Can we say that out of nowhere Euro golfers can show up? Absolutely, and they have over the years. It's their home turf. They've been playing at Renaissance Club the last 4 or 5 years. So definitely in play, and you should be embracing that. Guys like Matteo Manicero, right, that shot -7 today, did not just come out of nowhere, by the way, right? He had gained a bunch of strokes on approach in round 1 and then improved on that out there for today. What's going on, Antonio? Rory's ranked number 82 in approach. Yeah, that's why I'm staying away from him, man. Do I think it's all rust? It might be. In general, his irons have also been the worst part of his game, the part of his game where he's been a little bit shoddy. So, yeah, I would say I'm a little bit worried about it. And it might be rust. It might just be the fact that it's not the sharpest part of his, repertoire. What's going on, Ross? Thoughts about Lana Del Rey's brother? Yeah, dude. First off, Lana Del Rey. But yeah, Alejandro he made a birdie on his first 6 holes, right? He was like -6 through 6. The thing too, Ross, is he's doing it with the approach play. I had to look at the shots gained metrics. I'm like, did he just make everything? Like, was he just making 30, 40 footers, going out there and getting 6 birdies? No, he hit a dart on like every single hole. So yeah, he's actually, did I have him on here and did I skip him? Yeah, look at this, guys. So to show you that I wasn't making this up, right? Am I on the right tab? Yeah, there we are, right? Let me get this off of here. A comment that is, he's in my player pool. Alejandro Del Rey. I meant to actually mention him as one of our options. He's hitting the ball unbelievably well. He was sneaking down there towards the bottom end of the board, so I couldn't see him under some of those comments. But yeah, 5.5% ownership. So I think some people are going to play him because of the fact that he's hit the ball so well. And also he started 6 under through 6. But if he would, just been making 30, 40 footers, I'd probably be worried about it. But it's the opposite, right? Who is a fade from the top 5 with no staying power? That's a great question, by the way. Let me look through the shots gained metrics. That's probably the best way to do so. So actually, I'll just share this tab instead of the projections here real quickly. The best way to do this is to look at the top 5 and then look at their shots gained metrics. Now, I would say per the shots gained metrics, if you're looking at the guys in the top 5, most likely to fall off per the shots gained would be a Rasmus Højgaard. Believe it or not, a Rory McIlroy, because he's losing about 0.6 strokes on approach. My bad there. Out there over rounds 1 and 2. Now, reality is it's Rory McIlroy, right? So he's not the most likely to fall off. If I was going to give you an answer, it's Matteo Manassero. Unfortunately, right, our Italian god that went out there and gave us the top DraftKings score of the day. You would say, oh, this 4 shots gained approach is pretty sweet. Right? It's 4 shots gained per round, by the way, right? He's gained 8 shots gained approach over the first 2 rounds. But yeah, he's unfortunately probably the most likely guy to fall off. What's going on, Barry? Smash the like button for your boy Luke. Appreciate that, Barry. Yeah, go out there and hit that like button if you guys haven't already. And he said, Windy C smash incoming. Okay. Barry, by the way, has a really good track record. So I'm not on Windy C, but I'm questioning it now. Thoughts on Perez? I love him, Nick. He's playing solid golf. Shots gained approach have been decent to this point. I've got him at about 7.2% ownership, which is about average for this range. You can see there are some lower owned players, but it's a lot of your earlier starters. And while Perez doesn't have a late tee time, he's got a late enough tee time out there for me. So yeah, I always love Victor Perez. I love my DP World Tour studs. And he would definitely be one of those players. And I just realized I was on the wrong tab there again. But yeah, here's that ownership number I was referring to. He's at about 7.2%. I've got guys like Mackenzie Hughes at 7. I've got Matthew Jordan 6.4%. Guys like Jesper Svensson or even Lee Hodges are lower owned, but they're also teeing off earlier and not playing as well with their shots gained metrics. They're not doing it as sustainably. Just saw Homa's stats and you can't believe he made the cut. Yeah, dude. I have to say, I actually bet against him for props. So, yeah, dude, I've jumped ship on him. He's losing about 2 shots gained approach. Not good. He's, I think, very viable to blow up tomorrow. So we'll see. What's going on, Ross? Who's the chalk guy that snuck through and is going to bail out some chalk donkeys? So at -3, yeah, who's just going to pop off that shouldn't have made the cut? Davis Thompson is probably that guy. I faded him this week after the win. He ended up making the cut on the number, so that's probably the guy. And honestly, outside of him, I can't see anyone that was like mega chalky that I'm rooting against. So yeah, it's probably Davis Thompson. And Davis Thompson, by the way, tried to do everything he could to miss the cut and ended up making it on the number. And that was despite shooting like +4 his last like 4 holes, something atrocious like that. All right, let's hop over here to DraftKings and build a lineup together. So now that we've gone through a few players that I like, some of the ownership numbers that you're able to see on screen there, now let's go through some of my strategy out there for tomorrow. So what we're going to do here is essentially just give you an idea of the thought process when clicking players, and not so much during going out there and like, oh, who do you click, right? Like we just went through some players. That was more so to give you an idea of what I'm looking for in guys. The far more interesting part when playing PGA DFS is how you cater your lineup out there to the contest that you're entering. If you're entering a contest like the lottery, unfortunately, I don't think it's the best slate for the large field GPP, right? Because if you're going to enter that kind of contest, you've got to find leverage. You've got to find a spot to beat 30,000 other entries, or even 7,000 other entries, right? Like you have in this GPP. And to do so, you've got to find an ugly option to use. Maybe it is a low-owned guy. Who did you mention in that 6K range? Who's like 5%. So Langask could be in play. Victor Perez at 7%. Like you've got to make sure that you're getting very intentional about your differentiation, because if you're lazy about clicking names, it's real easy to just try and take all the chalk, right? All the later starters. And in a large field GPP, that would get you into some trouble. So let me show you how easy that could be. So let's start off with Aubert. I think will be pretty popular. I think he's a solid play out there for tomorrow. Even with that, let's take Sanjay. Let's throw in a Brian Harmon with his approach play numbers. Also relatively late tee time, so I think he makes some sense. Let's throw in a Sahith Thagala. I think just way too cheap here. So with these four guys, our lowest owned player is going to be Harmon at like 13, 14%. So you've got quite a bit of chalk here, but I think that's okay considering it's the top end of the board, and also because that's the better side of tee times, at least for what I think. Again, I could be wrong, right? I'm not pretending like I just have a crystal ball and know what's going to happen, but based on experience, I think the later guys are going to get the better end of conditions. So we're going to have to try and get different with our last two spots. So this is where I think the lottery and like if you're entering the big GPP, is just not fun. I don't know. It's not the best slate for it, because if you wanted to take like a Højgaard, who is my preferred option up here, has the late tee time and he's hitting the ball well, he's like 15% owned. So that gives us one spot to get different. If you took Højgaard, you'd essentially have to leave like $500 on the table and go down here and force in like a Victor Perez with a whole $500 left on the table. If you did that, you'd probably get away with it in the large field GPP, but these aren't my favorite kind of lineups to build. What I'd prefer to do is, rather than taking a super chalky Højgaard up here, is get a little bit different about it. And really the only option here to get super different with would be a Siwoo, who you could get at like sub 5%, or I guess potentially Novak, you could take it sub 5% as well. But once again, it's no one that you feel that great about. So sorry, I meant to click the wrong guy there. I meant to hit Siwoo Kim. If you throw in a Siwoo Kim, your last guy in, I guess, could be like a Ryan Fox. Maybe you throw in an Eric Cole to get a slightly low-owned player. Your last two spots in the large field lottery, you're just building suboptimally. And again, that's okay, right? The best plays don't always get there out there in the large field GPPs, but I prefer the smaller field contests, the single entries out there for tomorrow, just because you can afford to take a little bit more chalk. So if I was entering a single entry, just to give you that perspective, I'd be okay with taking Højgaard here as long as my last man in wasn't mega chalk, right? So my last man in, even in a single entry, probably wouldn't be Rasmus Højgaard. It probably wouldn't be somebody like Antoine Rosner. It might be a Seamus Power though, right? And sure, Seamus Power has an earlier tee time, which might be suboptimal, but you're going to have to get different at some spots. So this is the kind of lineup build that I prefer, that I think has a better chance at hitting out there tomorrow, which is why I'm playing more single entries, right? If my player pool, if my idea for the slate, like if I think more chalk is going to hit, why would I play in the lottery, right? It's going to be hard to beat a bunch of chalk out there in the lottery. So that's why personally, and I think you guys should be doing this based on your slate, if you like a lot of the low-owned diamonds in the rough, then maybe you should be playing more GPP lineups, right? Playing more lottery type of contests. If you like a lot of chalk, kind of like I do because of the weather, then maybe you should be playing smaller field contests so you don't have to worry about ownership nearly as much. So that would be my one takeaway from this live stream, is make sure that your player pool reflects the kind of exposure that you plan on getting to. So that's all I've got for DFS, guys. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already, and we'll go over some last second questions here. Davis Riley tried to miss the cut. Yeah, did he tried to pull a Dustin Johnson or a Hideki Matsuyama, who's been infamous for doing that? Matt Wallace tried harder. That is absolutely correct. On the Isco side, glad to see that Haynes Springer not falling off a cliff. Yeah, how'd he do? I haven't watched a second of the Isco, and that's probably not going to change just based on the fact that it's such a shitty field. But let's see. Oh, wrong site. I thought they had the live stats for the Isco, but I guess not. So let's see. Where's Haynes Springer? Yeah, tied for fifth. Lovely story, I would say, about it. Right? He wasn't even on the Corn Ferry Tour when he went out there and got his card. I believe he did it through qualifying school. So really hard way to get your PGA Tour card and going out there. No love for Yannick Paul. Yeah, let's take a look at the shots gained metrics, right? You'll probably see why there's not as much love out there for Yannick. So if we sort this out here by shots gained metrics, you see that today he lost strokes out there on approach and gained 3 strokes with the putter. So I think people that aren't very high on Yannick Paul, like myself, would be guys that don't think he's going to sustain that 3 shots gained putting. Could he? Sure, but stat nerds like myself, and yeah, I'm a self-admitted stat nerd for sure, know that the shots gained putting can be a little bit volatile. So yeah, that would be my concern out there with Yannick. All right, now that we've gone through DFS, let's talk through some props. So I think this golf course is going to play a little bit harder out there with the wind, the rain out there in the afternoon. Even if the wind dies down, I still think it's going to play harder than what we had for the first few days. So I kind of like fades out here for moving day, especially considering, oh, there's the slip. I guess I gave away the slip there, but that's all right. This is on this YouTube account. But let's see. Let's refresh this and see if it's still up there. So you guys know the props I took. We're going to be taking the same thing if we can here. So that prop got taken off. And then do we still have what it was? Adam Scott over bogeys, right? So we still have that one posted, but we don't have, actually, no, it was Minwoo we took, right? Okay. I guess I'll just put that in there because I like it. And we need a second pairing. But Minwoo over 67 was the other prop that I took, and he's still at that number. So the prop that I took over here, I'll just show it to you. I don't really care. This is not my main account where I get all my exposure. So obviously this $100 is not all I'm entering. Just a little bit of a wake-up call. Underdog Lines Maker, if you think this is my only account, it's not. There's nothing they can do about it, though. Max Homa under 5 birdies is 0.9x multiplier. So that was on the board before. That's not on there anymore. It does have that multiplier. So even though this Adam Scott one has the multiplier towards the over, I would still take it. Right? I did that out there with the Max Homa prop. This Minwoo over 67, I'll talk about here in a second. Adam Scott over 1.5. He's teeing off a little bit later, so he is getting the slightly better side, but he is not a very good bogey avoider. He's been very sloppy out here in 2024. In general, well, excuse me here. Let me get a sip of this. In general, has really tailed off a lot in 2024 with his consistency, and 1.5 bogeys would essentially be like half the field average. I'll show you the averages from today. The birdie average is about 3.92 per round. Bogey average is about 2.82 per round. And while the cut line is going to happen, you're going to have a higher quality player making it to the weekend. Conditions are now more difficult from the weather perspective. Now we have higher winds. Now we also have a little bit of rain in the picture. So I think the birdie average is going to go down to like 3.75 per round, maybe even the whole way down to like 3.5 per round. And I think this bogey average is probably going to be at least 3 per round. So it's going to add up to likely around like a half a stroke under par scoring average. So it's not like I think it's going to go from playing like easy out there to extremely difficult. But I do think you're going to see a lack of super low rounds. Like this -7 that you saw from Manicero today, or Alejandro Del Rey going out there and shooting -8 is probably not going to happen out there for moving day, right? Even with some moving day pin locations, the weather is just not going to let the players go super low. So out there with my exposure, right, I had that under on Max Homa because he was teeing off early. Max Homa, by the way, if you didn't see the shots gained, he's losing like 2 strokes approach per round. So where is he down here? I don't have this sorted correctly, do I? Yeah, I don't. So let me sort this by total score, go down here to the guys at -3. And to see Max Homa here is right, losing about 2 shots gained approach per round. That's why I took him for the under there at 5. So I guess they ripped that off the board, which is kind of unfortunate. If it comes back up and you're watching this later on and they still have him at 5, I would definitely recommend taking that. The substitute here, though, would be this Adam Scott over on bogeys. Like I said, he's not a very good bogey avoider. And even though he's teeing off later, the rain could be a little bit troublesome. So I'm still okay taking him at about half the field average. And then Minwoo Lee at 67 strokes, he's teeing off early. So just like Max Homa, he has to deal with the windier conditions. And given the fact that Minwoo is only -3 through the first 2 rounds, right, he shot -3 round 1, today shot even par, right, he at best would have pushed to this point. And now he's going to have the harder conditions out there for Saturday. And right, even if it's, a complete toss-up, let's say that morning and afternoon ends up playing pretty flat, it's still going to play harder, right, than what we had for days 1 and 2. So I definitely like that fade. And on books, just to give you some perspective, he is up at 67.5 strokes, but is juiced towards the under. So he's -140 towards the under there. So I think 67 strokes is a pretty decent line for Minwoo, all things considered. But with the push equity at 67, the harder weather, maybe these books haven't accounted for it enough. At least that's what I'm kind of counting on out there. So that's what I ended up taking for my exposure. It looks like that one ended up getting ripped off. If that moves to 67, right, maybe you stay away from it. But yeah, this Adam Scott prop definitely makes a lot of sense. Let's move over to Prize Picks. So Prize Picks did have a board posted, but it was only 2 categories, if memory serves me correctly. So let's look at Prize Picks. Popular, by the way. I just want to see what people are playing real quick. Probably a lot of overs on birdies and unders on strokes, I would imagine, out there for the general public, which I don't necessarily agree with. If I was going to take anything for a positive stance, I think Prize Picks is the place to do it because their pricing is a little bit softer than what we have on Underdog. To give you some perspective, they have guys like McIntyre, 0.5 lower. Same thing with a Wyndham Clark, a Corey Connors. All of those kind of guys are at 5 birdies on the Underdog side. So if you were going to try and find a place to take positive stances, I would do it with your later starters, right? So I guess just to give you an example here, right? Somebody that would be going off later that makes a decent amount of birdies, right, might be Robert McIntyre. He's got a decent track record of this over 4.5 here, and his shots gained metrics haven't been all that bad. The issue is for me is McIntyre is not an elite tier birdie maker, right? He's about average on the PGA Tour when it comes to his birdie or better percentage, which is why I probably want to get exposure there myself. But if you were going to take anyone here on Prize Picks for a positive stance, I would do it for birdies, and I would do it for an elite tier player that's teeing off late. I guess Aaron Rye, with his form, you could make that same kind of argument for. But guys like Corey Connors, Harmon, like I'd be leaning on their overs for sure, but they're not the best birdie makers. Both are pretty, I would say, conservative players. They don't take the most risks out there on the PGA Tour, which makes me a little bit more hesitant to mix them in myself. In terms of the strokes, I still think that this is better pricing than what we have on Underdog. They have a lot of guys like 0.5 higher over here on the Prize Pick side. But at the same time, I don't know if I love unders, right? Like, I think it's going to play harder. I think this weather is going to make an impact. So I didn't enter anything yet over here on Prize Picks. And based on the board right now, I don't think there's anything we're going to add here on live stream. You guys know, right? I'm very selective about the props that I'm getting to. And if I'm going to mention them on live stream or for my Patreon members, it's because I'm damn sure that I think that they're value. And based on what I'm seeing here, before I run my entire set of projections, which again, I didn't have time to do before we went live here, the board just dropped too late. Out there close to the stream, I'm not going to know what to enter. So again, I think if anything, these birdies are going to be where you'd want to take your positive stances. And based on strokes, I think there's going to be some fades. The fades over there on Underdog, you're going to get better value on your elite tier players. But what we get here on Prize Picks that makes it different is that we can find guys like Alejandro Del Rey, Matthew Jordan, if we wanted to fade. We can find players that maybe aren't as stout, right, as the guys over there in Underdog. I guess the other issue on top of that, though, is that most of them, right, are later tee times. So like this Ugo Kassoud guy, the only like later starter I can see here would be like Charlie Hoffman, but he's at 69.5 strokes, right? So he only has to shoot under par to hit. If tomorrow morning we wake up, and by the way, I'm pulling an all-nighter, so I'll be up watching this and able to react to it. Charlie Hoffman, if conditions for the first hour or two of play are more difficult than we expect, might be an over to take at 69.5 strokes. So again, right now, probably nothing we're going to get to here in live stream, but make sure to check out my Patreon page for my entire player pool out there in DFS and all the different slips that I'm getting to throughout the evening, because I'm sure at some stage I will be getting to something. It's just a matter of when out there when I can figure out what to do, which again, sometimes here on live stream, we can't do because I have to actually run my projections there. But let's take a look at what we're doing on pick 6, which I haven't even peeked at the board yet. So let's see what we've got on here. So looks like not many birdies are better to choose from, but let's see what they've got for strokes. Looks like a slightly bigger selection and a whole lot of baloney, if you're asking me here. Maybe like a JT under 67.5, but I don't love that with the higher winds out there tomorrow and that rain out there in the afternoon. Jeez Louise. Yeah, I've got to say, guys, this might be my least favorite prop board that we've had for a long time. I think if anything, like maybe a Sahith over 66.5. Now, I actually like Sahith tomorrow. He's also got a late tee time, so I don't think this prop is great. But like I said, if anything, maybe you would lean over on Sahith. Yikes! This pick 6 board is actually pretty accurate. Like at 4.5, a lot of these guys are toss-ups to me. Like Corey Connors is definitely a lean over, but he's by no means a lock compared to some of the other pick 6 spots that we've had. Like normally a pick 6 board is like the easiest value in human history. Like you go on here, it's like, okay, pick this, pick this, pick this. Yeah, not so much right here. If anything, maybe a Max Homa under. Do they have his strokes up here, Max Homa? Yeah, so they do have him at 67.5. Even at that number, I guess I would be leaning towards the over, but yeah, this is a tough scene. Let's see. Yeah, pars are the the worst category in human history when it comes to playing props. And then this fantasy points is usually highly correlated to what we have here with strokes. So yeah, it's a stay away slate, guys. Like honestly, right now, I think there's a little bit of value on this underdog board, but nothing I'd go overboard with. It's going to be a little bit harder out there tomorrow, right? That weather is dictating that. I think the one thing to keep an eye on is the early conditions out there. If there's one thing I could tell you, right, is to take a look over here in data golf here in the morning. And if you're a West Coast person that's going to be up, this will probably be a lot easier for you. But even if you're on the East Coast and you happen to like wake up in the middle of the night, maybe go over here to data golf, just bring it up on your phone or whatever while you're sitting there in bed, or take it from your nightstand or whatever and look at it. And just click this round 3 tab and then just look at the scoring average. There's one of 2 things that can happen, okay? Actually, one of 3 things that can happen. It can play just like it did days 1 and 2. I would say that this is the most unlikely scenario. But if you wake up tomorrow and it's like playing a whole stroke under par, and there's every hole's been played, then maybe you do slam a lot of unders on strokes and like overs on birdies. But I don't think that's likely, but I at least wanted to mention the possibility. The second possibility is that it plays like a half a stroke under, which is kind of what I'm expecting. If that's the case, there's probably not a lot of value. That's in the most unfortunate case. Is if we wake up tomorrow and the stroke average is like 0.4, 0.5 under, well, I think that both boards are decently accurate. Like I said, a few spots that we can find value, but nothing that's going to be drastically off. Now, the other scenario would be if you wake up tomorrow morning and it's playing over par. I would say the most likely scenario, right, is the one we just went through, right? The one that's playing like half a stroke under. But if anything's going to go differently, if it's going to play, different than what I expect, I think it might play way harder. I think that's actually in play, that it would play well over par. Let me show you why. And this isn't completely unsubstantiated, guys. Last year, it played 1.7 over par the last round. What happened in the last round? It was windy and it was rainy. Now, the other rounds, it wasn't that bad, right? But look at this in round 1. Round 1, it was a little bit windy out there and only played 0.3 shots under par. The far more interesting years, we go to the one before that. Year before that, every single round played over par. It was windy for all 4 days. It rained days 1 and 2, so it was especially nasty. But even after the cut line, again, this was a co-sanctioned event. This was not a DP World Tour event in 2022. There were legit PGA Tour players, right, playing in this event, right? Xander won this at -7 back there in 2022. It still played over par the last 2 days. So that's why I mentioned that, right? Like, I think that it might play half a stroke under, right? Maybe it's like 0.3 under, like we had back there for round 1 last year. But over par is in play at this golf course, especially if it's windier than what they're calling for. And especially if for some reason the wind stays up when it's rainy. If it's rainy and windy out there, that PM might get really spicy. So that's what I'll say about the props. Right now, I think you'd be a little bit choosy about what you're mixing in. But outside of that, you might be able to find some other stuff to enter. I actually saw a prop that I want to get to, so I'm going to give you guys another underdog slip here. So I'm going to take that Adam Scott prop that I haven't entered myself. Like I said, I haven't been able to get to this, and I'm going to enter this Brian Harman combination. Brian Harman is a 0.9x multiplier. It's actually a 0.9. Actually, shit, it's 0.9x on both. I kind of regret taking 2.9x multipliers. But I guess even with the shit payout, I do like both props here. So it's not the worst combination. But yeah, I thought that 5 for Brian Harman was an even payout. And I thought the Adam Scott one was going to be the 0.9x. But yeah, I still like both these projections. So maybe you have other sports you can mix in. If you're playing like MLB props or something and you can find like a scorcher, I don't think it's a bad idea to take these 2 and then potentially pump up the payout a little bit out there for the 3rd spot. So yeah, you can still enter this if you'd like to. I'll say the 2.23x payout is sub-ideal for sure. I did not realize both had the 0.9x payout, but I got a little excited with those projections because they had Brian Harman up at that 5.5 before, but it got ripped off. It got taken off like 30 seconds before I wanted to take it. And you guys already know I liked that Adam Scott prop and hadn't gotten to it yet. So I like the projections, just those damn multipliers suck. Are any of the par fives downwind? Great question. I will check right now. So wind direction is coming in from the north. So it's a northerly wind is what they would call it. And let me bring up the Pro Visualizer because I don't know off the top of my head, but it's really easy to check whether it's going to be downwind or not. And my guess, by the way, is that at least one of them are, right? But let's see if it's more than one that's downwind. All right, so the wind direction is to the south. Hole number 3 is your first par 5. So this is a side wind, right? I guess for your second shot, it's a little bit downwind, but it's mostly side wind even out there for your second shot. Hole 10 is your next par 5. This one is going to play directly into the wind, so that's not ideal. And then 16 is the same thing. I can tell you it goes... Actually, sorry, no, it goes directly downwind. So yeah, one of them is going to go downwind. One of them is a side wind, and then one of them is into. So it's about as neutral a wind direction as you can get. And I believe this is the wind direction that is the opposite of what the course was designed for. The wind direction the course was designed for, by the way, and I caught this from the broadcast today. I didn't know this before today. Is this? I guess it's northerly direction, right? Going in this from, I guess, behind them, right off the tee box and from a little bit on the right side. That kind of wind direction up there to the top left is what the course is made for. And you can see, right, tomorrow it's going south, which is directly opposite of that. Sometimes it makes the course easier, right, because they sometimes set up the course to play harder in the prevailing wind. A lot of times, and I would say more often, when it plays against the prevailing wind, it plays harder. So we'll have to see. Honestly, I don't know what's going to happen. I haven't, we don't have enough data to work with that. So we'll see. It'll be good. It'll be a good thing to pay attention to. Winwood just got taken off. Yep, not a surprised. Value secured. What's going on, Antonio? Have we talked about Hovland? So I'm going to keep that one behind the Patreon wall a little bit, just because I have a very big hot take on Hovland for tomorrow. Judge Moonshot. There you go. Aaron Judge, by the way, an absolute stud. Almost as much of a stud as Paul Skeens. Phil Lauer says you got a single $5 entry that's going to... I have no idea what you're saying here. You said you're going to put in a guy who's playing in the inclement conditions. So the early starter. So you're saying you're going to take an early starter in the lineup? I think I'm understanding you, dude. You definitely butchered that a little bit, but I think that makes sense, right? In your lineups, taking one early starter, maybe 2 in lotteries is the way to do it. If you're in a single entry, then 1's probably all you need. What's going on? Antonio said Rory's birdie prop is 5.5 and it's even money. Yeah, I think under 5.5 is the play, if anything, but it is Rory McIlroy. The guy, even without his iron play, has made a shit ton of birdies the first 2 days. So I don't know if I would count him out against that. You think round score lines being 3 or 4 under par is 1 stroke too low? I agree with you on that. Yes. Especially with the wind, right? I think that's definitely playing into that. The issue is until I see it playing over par, I'm a little hesitant on it. But like I said, if you wake up tomorrow and it's going to play over par like it did in 2022, like if it's playing to like this 0.48 over par, that would be enough for me to hammer overs on strokes. Like if I wake up, I'm probably, well, like I said, I'm staying up all night actually, so I'm not going to have to wake up. But 2 hours into play, when I go over here onto Data Golf, if it's playing over par, yeah, dude, I'm going to be taking a ton of fades. Yeah, I see what you're saying now. By the way, I was confused there. I was like, am I having like a stroke or something? Like, what's going on with this? Bill says the par 5 scores seem a little bit low. Every player's at 13 and they have to shoot -3 to cover. Yeah, a lot of push equity there, I would say, especially considering that one of them is playing directly into the wind. I would agree with that take. Now, know that there's a lot of push equity there and that a push is going to screw your payout, right? So I don't know. That's the issue with even lines like that, especially when it's like a par 3 strokes or something like a par 5 strokes where you only have like 3-4 holes. It's kind of annoying. Like when you end up pushing and it's like refunding a 2-man, or you have a 3-man and it pushes and you only get like a 2.5x payout. It's sub-ideal for sure. Is paying -140 for Harman birdies over 4.5 crazy? Yeah, I wouldn't take them over birdies. I would say so, Antonio, because I'm pretty sure there are other guys at like -150 that you could take that are better players that are going off later. So I would try and take somebody that has a better birdie or better pedigree. That's, got a higher birdie or better percentage out there in the year. This is your favorite golf page by far. Appreciate that, Mark. Can you plug what other services I offer? Absolutely. So appreciate that, by the way, the kind words and whatnot. But I have a Patreon page, so I'll go ahead and just bring that up here. That's where you can find all the other content that I do. So most of my free content, in fact, all the free content that I do is posted over here on YouTube. Some extra little nuggets that I'll post over there on Twitter/X from time to time. But my Patreon page, which is down in the description of this live stream, also in the description of this replay, if you're watching this after the fact, is where you can get all the analysis. So whether it's my spreadsheets that you saw throughout the DFS section, where I'm going over all my plays for tomorrow, you can find that on the DFS tier. DFS tier gives you my entire player pool, projections for every single player, modeling all of that. And then for all the different slips that I'm entering, so it seems like you're into props, right? You were looking at like some of the round score stuff and like that, Mark. The prop side is probably what you want to check out. Now, you might want to do the combined tier if you're playing DFS and on props. But the prop tier is where I post these sheets, which has all the stat averages from every single round, and it goes through all the exposure I'm getting to. So I'll post all the slips that I'm entering. So like, for example, this was posted over there on my Patreon page with all the reasoning for me taking it. So that's what's on the Patreon. And yeah, definitely check it out if you haven't already. That's all I've got, guys. Going to go ahead and hop on out of here now, but hopefully you guys go out there and crush your exposure for moving day. Best of luck out there with whatever you're getting to, and go out there and make your boy proud. For round 4, we will be doing the same thing, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you go out there and catch that when we're going live tomorrow night, and also smash that like button before you hop on out of here for a little bit of good luck tomorrow. That's all I've got. Cheers to you. Cheers to you if you're staying up to watch the golf, and let's enjoy ourselves some overnight action.